everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Struggle. Today we're going to be doing part one of our two-part series. I'm joined with Mr.
Jason Blackledge.
Jason Blackledge.
Yes, sir.
And I am
Jeff Monroe.
Jeff
I know
Monroe.
he's not used to introducing himself, so
Right, I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
And today we're joined by the lovely Miss Chris Gatlin. How are you today?
I'm doing good. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all.
Well, we appreciate you being here. So one of the things, one of the reasons, I called you, Jason and I get together almost like every Sunday, with the exception of a few, right? When he's not too busy for me,
football season.
or football season,
just like-
or I'm just too exhausted to deal with Jason on that day, right? We were talking a couple weeks ago, and this month, like I told you, we wanted to look into the family side of things, right? Mothers, fathers, relatives of those who have struggled with addiction and have either succeeded or failed or, lost their lives in some cases, right? And automatically I thought about you because we have a history, and we had a great relationship, and through the years we've lost touch, but we'll see each other every now and then pick right back up. And I can remember just doing Thanksgiving and Christmas at your house, coming over there with Tim. And Tim, I sponsored Tim for a good little while, a couple of years, and that's how we grew into a relationship together. And I just wanted you on, and I wanted to get a perspective of a mother, of a parent, of somebody who had struggled with addiction. And you have experience with two of your children, one your stepson and Tim, right? And what it was like, kind of growing up, and you see them going through active addiction. What you as a parent went through, and I just want to hear a little bit about it. Look, you can tell us a little bit about your background, and
Well,
then
I'm going to start by telling everybody that I've been a nurse for 40 plus years.
Wow.
And for the greatest part of my career, I was a cancer nurse. And just like we tell our cancer patients, it's not just the patient that has cancer, it's their entire family.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true with addiction. Once
Absolutely.
you have a stepchild with addiction, it doesn't only affect them, it affects the entire family, their environment, any plans that you want to do, any meals you want to prepare. It doesn't stop with just the person in isolation, going through the recovery process and stuff. It affects every aspect of their life.
Absolutely. And it even says that in this book that we read, how, cancer patients, it touches the lives of this person and that person with addiction. I mean, it's a ripple effect,
Yeah.
right?
And the thing that gets me, being a nurse, I recognized early on that addiction is a disease. We still fight that taboo that, they're just,
choice.
they choose to do that. But most people don't understand that it's something inside of them that's in their genes or genetics or something. It's a disease. They don't have a choice, and when they do make the choice to recover, it's a very, very difficult path, and not everybody gets it the first time out. There have to be
Right.
several attempts, and as a parent, you can't quit. You have to keep supporting them with every attempt they make and celebrate the small victories that they have. And I still have Tim's 1 year chip. I still have Tim's either 3 or 5 year chip that, it was his choice to give that to me that, hey, Mom, I made it. Here's my chip. Now, with my stepson, we celebrate, he'll be 5 years
Wow.
in the summer, and we have the date more.
So happy for
and
him.
yeah, he's doing
Yeah.
amazing. And every year we, go to dinner, his choice, So, but he's 5 years.
And I remember seeing him quite a bit as well.
Yes, indeed.
And I remember giving Tim that 1 year chip at the Life Center, and it was, that was so I think I was probably about 4 or 5 years sober at that time, and that was my first guy that I had sponsored that made it in a year, and I was just like, man, this is pretty
Excited about
yeah,
that.
you know,
I wanted to ask a question about what you were talking about real quick before we move on. Is where you talked about the disease concept, which I find that maybe is not information or knowledge that a lot of family members have, right?
or understand.
They don't
Yeah.
embrace it,
Well,
you
and I was
know.
going to ask you, do you think that was like, did that have positive and negative effects for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, because you'd think as a nurse I'd recognize the signs immediately, but I didn't. You know, because I was in the role of a mother, or, you know, this is my son, or, you know, I'm working now. You know, I did not recognize the signs or symptoms, and I didn't address it initially, you know, didn't know. And initially it took me re-educating myself as to, you know, this is really an illness. You know,
Yeah.
what can I do to help my child? You know, sometimes you got to get out of the way to help your
Yeah.
child too, you know. But
Yeah.
it was like, where do you draw the line? And, you know, being there all the time and telling him, just pick up the phone and call me, just pick up the phone and call me. Well, you can't make them do that. You know, it has to be a choice. And, you know, he may have chosen to call somebody else or call Jeff or something. I'm in a bad place. I need some help. Walk me through this, talk me through this. But, you know, I wasn't that person of choice that he would call when he needed help, but it didn't mean that I stopped offering it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Well, we also, as somebody who struggled with addiction for years too, and knowing what I did to my mom and dad, like I was easily able to manipulate them, right? And it's something that as children that we can do easily. We find a way to, you know, weasel our way into y'all and play at y'all's heartstrings because
Oh,
you're the mother, right?
absolutely.
And
I
it's
can
like, man, I want to help my child.
Yeah,
You
I can
know,
remember getting a phone call from Tim. Mom, I got to have $100 right now. Or
right?
blah blah blah
That's
blah
always
blah.
what we do at that.
It's gonna
It's
happen,
never
and
do
you
you got
know.
time to talk. It's
Yeah.
like, let me
No.
get that
Like, I
100.
need to
And
get a
it's
little
like
money.
it didn't
Yeah.
matter what I was doing, you know, and I was lucky to have that kind of job where I could slip away from it, go take care of that, and go back to my job, you know.
Yeah.
But it was his emergency all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Like you lived, you know, we don't think about it from our point of view,
Right.
right? Because like my life is nothing but chaos. Like, right. And I was watching a video today, like, where it talks about like, I know how to live in chaos, right? But like
Right. Comfortable in the chaos.
yeah, but you're having to live in my emergency also.
That's right.
As the family member, especially as the family member that I'm calling and saying, oh, you know, if I don't have this in 30 minutes,
Yes.
he's gonna, you know, and it's like I'm putting you in my chaos also. Where for the average or normal person, chaos is not a state that they live in, right? Like I you know, when you kind of learn that like we in addiction learn to live in that fight or flight, right? And that is abnormal. Like it is not normal to consistently be in that constant, you know, the fight or flight. I'm never in rest relaxation. It's just always next
What's the next?
problem, next chaos, next issue, next lie, next manipulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you combine that with, you know, Tim had other medical issues as well, you know, so you combine an addiction with medical issues on top of that, and it's just up and down and up and down and up and down. There's no calm, you know.
Yeah.
We discovered early on he was bipolar, you know, with the medicine for that, you know, and up and down, up and down. Then he'd be manic, and then he'd be so depressed, you know, he couldn't get out of bed, you know, and you can't force somebody out of bed or force them to a job. And as a parent, all I ever wanted was him to be happy,
Right.
healthy, you know, have a nice family and a family life. And, you know, it was anything but that, you know, from when he was very young.
Yeah, I think for years, I you know, questioned my dad. What did you expect from me? And I always thought that he had these expectations, and then I was failing, and I was basing my success off the what I thought he wanted from me in these things. And you know, after I got sober and I was able to go to him and kind of talk to him about those things, one of the first things he said, like, I never had expectation. I just wanted you to be happy and I wanted you to do well,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And I kept seeing you fail over and over again, but it's not my failure,
yeah.
you know?
My parents, my dad had a third grade education and my mother a seventh
Mm-hmm.
grade education. So their success for me was, oh, if I just graduate high
Yeah.
school, And I was telling this to Tim one day and I said, all I want for you is to get a good education so
Yeah.
you can support yourself and your family,
Mm-hmm.
and those types of things. But
So when did you talked about not seeing the signs, I guess. Like, I guess, one, maybe you don't know exactly when it started, or maybe he's told you, but like, when do you think you were able to
That's what I was
see,
gonna ask, yeah.
like, that he's got a problem?
right. Well, Tim went to college for a while, and then he opened up a motorcycle shop. We talked before
Had a lot of
about.
success
Yeah, he
early on,
did.
yeah.
And then, I think part of his taking drugs was staying up late to work on the motorcycles, and then uppers and downers and this and that. And then I think his marriage suffered because of that. And it wasn't until into his married life, that I saw that he was having issues. His wife would tell me some things and he would tell me some things. And, before that period of time from college to when he opened his business, he lived away from me for some time. So you don't see that when they live away from you, when it's only a phone call or they visit every once in a blue moon. You're not around to see it and pick up on that. But definitely through his early marriage life, started picking up that there were some things.
Yeah. And so you started seeing a pattern
Yes.
where like it just started getting worse and worse. When I say that, like, did you start seeing um I guess the addiction getting worse? Would like his behavior start changing, where you start to say, well, this guy's on something?
Well,
Most definitely.
yes, because he was trying to make a success of his business. So, like I said, he was taking drugs to stay up and work on the bikes, and then not getting any sleep. And his wife was trying to manage the children and stuff, and then their finances started
Yeah.
taking a hit. Mama, we need some money to, I can't make my truck note, or I can't make the Tahoe note, or something like this. And trying to put money into the business, and what you didn't use up for college, I'll help you with your business. But
Yeah.
it started being financial, and then it started being relationship with friends and things like that, cutting himself off from
The
friends.
isolation began.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's where we find those of us that struggle with addiction find that comfortable. Like Jason was saying, that's just the area that we live in. That chaos is just comfortable to us because that's what we know. So you were talking a little bit about this. He'd reach out, but he would only reach out for the things he needs, not for the help he needed.
Correct.
Right? When did he finally say, "Hey, I'm struggling with addiction, a drug addiction. I need some help"? Is that something that never came to you? Is that something he saw it on his own?
I think he sought it out on his own initially, and I think he had been to some other treatment programs prior
Yeah.
to joining you, and they were not as successful. And I can remember dropping him off at one treatment center. And I mean, early on, let me back
Yeah.
up. Early on, I told him if he wanted to get into treatment, he had to get there on himself. So I
Yeah.
can remember taking him to the bus station. Now, went up to Shreveport or something, and I cried all the way home. Then another time, I volunteered to take him to Shreveport, and when I dropped him off at this facility, I would not have put my dog there.
Yeah.
Some of the upper floors were boarded with plywood and stuff across them, and I cried all the way home. And I thought, how can I leave my son there? I mean, I didn't know the reputation of the facility, but the facility itself just,
Yeah.
you wouldn't leave a dog there. But he had some success there. But I think his true success came when he came with you. It was a longer program.
Yeah.
It was,
That's back when it was 90 days. Was it or
I
no?
don't
No,
remember that.
it was-
I think it was
No, he
30
just
something.
yeah, it was 28, 30, but we, like we've always talked about, it was the IOP, the sober living.
Right. You
the
stay
OP, yeah.
connected, and I mean, that was one of the things, you got to divorce yourself from all those drug dealers and all those people, get that off your phone, get off your contacts and all of that. And once he went there, the place itself was calming, in my opinion, because it was wide open spaces. If you chose to leave there, you were walking on Pete and
yeah.
Joe away from there. there. It wasn't like, Mama, come get me. I'm not going to stay. I said, nope, you got to stay up there. And I think they were given a schedule of activities, and stuff was really structured for them there. And we got
And for somebody like Tim,
he
structure.
needed the structure.
Yeah, and Tim's, Tim's life is based, his past was based off, a structured type living, right? And for Tim, that's what he needed, And I can just remember even sponsoring Tim when he did go through Woodlake and have some of that time. It's if I didn't have a structured time and stuff like that, he would get annoyed. I'm like, well, maybe that's some of the shit you need to work on, bro. And that's what we are able to provide in treatment. We talk about that often, like, what is treatment? What do we provide? What do we give to those that come to treatment or seeking help? Well, we provide, one, a safe environment, like you were saying, and a structured environment. One of the biggest things about structure, we even talked about the smallest things, is getting up and making your bed.
That's right.
Right? Trying to achieve one goal in a day. If my goal is I make my bed, that's at least one goal. And then tomorrow we do this, because I know for me, it was this second by second, minute by minute deal, when I was getting sober and I went to treatment.
I was gonna ask, and I apologize because I don't know as much as y'all do, and maybe but
you surely don't know as much as I do.
don't.
I mean, we
and I certainly don't know as much about his life as his own mother does, right?
I meant just in general, you don't know.
Well, we knew that,
yeah.
But by the time, so at this moment that you're speaking about, like more structure, is when he reached some like year in multiple years. Was at this. I want to go back and ask though, like at this point though, was the marriage, the business, the this, the that, was that still a part of his life, or that had ended?
No, that had ended, and he had to make some, his wife kind of ended things, but, I tried to get her to allow him to see the kids because, that was foremost in his mind. He wanted to continue to have a relationship with the kids, but early on he slipped and he'd show up, wasted to see the kids, and she dug her high heels in, you can't see that. So I, as a mother trying to, please let him see the kids, that's foremost in his mind, his heart, that's one of the things that's driving him to recover is for his kids, know, and that was very difficult for him, not being able to see them. And, the structure fell apart. You can call, so this time on this day in the week, but then she wouldn't answer the phone. So then that deteriorated. His business, that deteriorated. So it was then from job to job to job till I think he finally got clean, caught up with a friend of his that was clean as well. They had a good history. You need to come back to town, move back to where your family and your support group is, and then got a job and loved his job and was becoming very successful at it and getting his life back together, and met someone new, and then he
Remarried,
became remarried, and then a year or so into that became very, very ill with no diagnosis, and COVID hit, and then
that was a big time where he struggled.
He struggled because there was no connection during COVID. I mean, this televisit and all of that, and you couldn't necessarily see the people.
Yeah.
And talking on a telephone is not the same as you and I physically sitting here, and I can read your body language and see your eyes, and I can hear the tone of you. COVID, not only for him, but I think for a lot of people with addiction, COVID was one of the worst things that ever happened, the isolation, and I think it just did him in because, like you said, he needed structure.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be the boss, but he wanted somebody to say, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this, and it goes back to, he's that kind of person that needed tasks to be done and do this and complete it. And, he was always overachieving, and that was one of the things. Smart as a whip, everything you'd ask him to do, it was to perfection.
Yeah.
And I ask that question because I find that, like, for myself, and I feel like a lot of people, especially those that, have achieved quite a bit prior to, you have a business, you have, a marriage and this and that. And then I do have this addiction or these, this destruction in my life, right?
Right.
But then I find myself like, I just got to get that back. Right. And that's why I asked the question, was that like but you're saying he had that was gone, that was out of his life, and it wasn't the continued, like, no, I got to get my business back. I got to
No,
get my this, I got to get that, I got to do this.
he had to reach what they call rock bottom.
Right.
And
you
he had
know,
moved past.
that.
Yeah.
You can't have that marriage back. I can't fix the relationship with
Yeah.
the kids. You're gonna have to just be glad that they're healthy, they're safe. I mean, there was nights he'd call me. He would be in the driveway at their home. Just parked there. Wishing he could see his kids and
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, no, he had to go all the way to the bottom and struggle to get back up and do away with those friends and get some good, clean people and, honestly want to make a go of his life again. And then, tragedy would hit. And one day he was rushing home from work to go to his stepson's birthday, and he had the wherewithal to put his vehicle in park, and he was on some back Louisiana roads, and the lady sitting on the porch saw him, having a seizure, called 911. They had to pry him out of the truck, break the window. He was on the ventilator. To this day, we don't know why.
Really?
And then he ended up with several autoimmune and lost over 100 pounds and just a deterioration that like I tease people and I say in 18 months we took him to see 50 different kinds of doctors. We saw everything but an OB-GYN. I mean, he saw neurologists, nephrologists, cardiologists, internal medicine, infectious disease, autoimmune doctors. We saw everybody, GI doctors, because
Yeah, I feel like we were at
go up and down.
Yeah, we were at the emergency rooms with Tim quite often, and he would call and he'd be like, "Hey man, I need you to come up here," and because he struggled with that one, being vulnerable in a hospital bed and
And
in
they
front
don't
of
believe
you,
what they're saying.
right in front of his wife, and he's like, I need somebody else here, and it was, it was very often there towards the end, and I guess, I was thinking about this, you know, some of the last conversations I had with him was during the COVID period, right? And all that transpired. And, Tim is a provider and always was a provider, and he always had a job, especially when he would get in a relationship. If he weren't able to provide and he weren't doing something for him, he felt like less of a man. Of course, he never wanted to show that vulnerability to you, never wanted to show that vulnerability to Diane or anything like that. Some of the conversations we had towards the end, it was the struggle with the health. That was this battle, right? Like not knowing, not being able to know. But the other part of it that we all struggle with is using and not being able to stop. And then the other part of it is wanting to use, but no, we can't, right? Is that it's so hard. It's either we'd rather go on to the bitter end, like we talk about, blotting out the intolerable situation best we can, or accept spiritual help. But then on the other hand, like some of the struggles that Tim was dealing with was, his mental health at the time, his physical health at the time, and knowing like I absolutely don't want to use either, right? And in not having a choice, and like some people choose a very tragic decision, other than choose to go on and use. You know what I'm saying? And I saw a lot of that, and as a sponsor, on this side of, on my side of things, it's like you try to do everything you can, right? But I'm not God, and I can't give you what you need. I can only provide some tools to help you and guide you, and to hear somebody struggling with those things, it's like it's out of control. And as a parent, right? I think about this often as a mother, unable to provide, or feeling that way that you you've done absolutely all you can and still aren't able to provide somebody with, you know, the sobriety that they want and need. I can't imagine that. Like,
It's hard, there was nights he'd call me in a panic,
yeah,
I'm gonna kill myself,
mm-hmm,
and then, I'd try to talk him down, and then he'd hang up on me, wouldn't answer, so I'd stay awake all night long. The
yeah,
next morning, he'd call me, "Hey, Mom," like
Yeah.
nothing was
yeah,
wrong,
right,
and I had spent the whole night worrying and praying, and you mentioned God right then. For a long time, Tim didn't believe in
yeah,
God because he struggled with, why is he doing this to me? Why isn't he helping me? Is there really a God? And he had been raised Catholic, went to Catholic school and all of that. And I truly, I think through part of his recovery, he finally recognized, whoever God was, that there was a higher
mm-hmm,
being. And to him, he finally, understood that,
Mm-hmm.
But when he was even in high school, at one time he had a plan to kill himself,
yeah,
and he went into counseling for that. And lots of times, many a night, I'd think to myself, is tonight the night?
yeah,
Is today the day?
Mm-hmm.
And on that last day, when his
mm-hmm,
wife called me, he's in a bad way, you need to come. And
yeah,
I can remember getting on the interstate and thinking, is today the
yeah,
day? And talking with her the whole way till I drove into their driveway, and then all the last I heard was, "I'm dead."
mm-hmm,
And he shot himself.
yeah,
And just within minutes, got there, turned him over, no pulse,
mm-hmm,
no nothing. And, I think it was a while before I felt peace for him.
mm-hmm,
Because, Diana eventually, would come to realize that I think he's at peace,
Yeah.
yeah,
He's not struggling. And the worst part for a mother is I miss my son. I miss what he was and what he could have been. But I have to take comfort that he's with God and with all of our other crazy relatives,
right,
and
mm-hmm,
that, he has some peace. And a friend of mine said something to me that, he won't find peace and happiness in this world, but
yeah,
maybe in the next,
yeah,
So that for a mother gives me hope, and it's so funny in the little church I go to now, there are, you know, probably 5 of us who have lost our sons,
mm-hmm.
you know,
To addiction
a
or,
couple
yeah,
to addiction, one to cancer at a
yeah,
young age, but it's something that only a mother who has lost a child would understand, or a father, but mostly a mother, because once you're a mother, you're always a mother.
yeah,
Dads sometimes come and go, but that child will always be your baby. That's your son, no matter if they're 6'4" and you're looking up to them and fussing, but they'll always be your baby. And after Tim died, I questioned myself for the longest
mm-hmm,
time, and still some days I have bad days where I thought, what could I have done different? Could I have intervened sooner? Should I have given the money then? Should I have done this?
yeah,
Should I have done that? And all I can garner is that at that window, that time and place, I did what I thought was best.
yeah,
And, I have to take comfort in that, but, when you only have one,
yeah,
that's it for me. When Tim was born, I had complications and was told that was it. I could
Yeah.
only have the one
mm-hmm,
child. Of course, I have wonderful stepchildren,
yeah,
but,
right. Let's not forget about them.
it's,
Yeah,
know,
and
it's hard.
God, man, I might need the Kleenex more than.
I'm trying to hold it together.
Guys, thank you for joining us for part 1 of this 2-part episode of Beyond the Struggle. Make sure to like, follow, share, subscribe. Did I get that, man? I
Yeah.
messed it up. And tune in next week for part 2.